Today we're talking about the genius of Evangelion, but before we get to that, let me talk about this video's sponsor. Thanks so much for sponsoring this video, Skillshare. What can I tell you about Skillshare? Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives, where millions come together to take the next step in their creative journey. Skillshare is for beginners, pros, dabblers, and masters. Members get unlimited access to thousands of inspiring classes with hands-on projects and feedback from a community of millions. There's always new classes to be found, and there are no ads on any of them. You can even learn with live classes, watching inspirational teachers, and learn with others in the moment. With thousands of inspiring classes tailored for creators, Skillshare lets you explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. Personally, I wanted to learn how to best create with ink and brush, which Yuko Shimizu's class on techniques with brush, nib, and pencil helped me with immensely. It's curated specifically for learning, meaning that they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can start exploring your creativity today. Thanks again Skillshare for sponsoring this video.
Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Evangelion is one of the best known anime out there. It's so big and well known that it's one of the benchmarks of the mecha subgenre. One that ends up surprising a lot of newcomers when they realize just how deep it goes. The writing and directing is thanks to Hideaki Anno, who created and oversaw every entry of the franchise, apart from the literary spin-offs anyway. He's an accomplished director both inside and outside the anime industry, carving out a very unique image for himself. Something that, when watching any one of his films, you'll notice it, be it calling cards or signature elements that run throughout each of his works. This is the idea of the auteur theory. I've been through it before, talking about Mamoru Oshii of Ghost in the Shell, Hayao Miyazaki of Ghibli, and Satoshi Kon and his sense of surrealism. It rings true with their films too. You know when you're watching, hell, you know if you're looking at one of their works. Auteur theory is simply the individual impression upon a piece of work that any one person has, but it's not necessarily inherent to any given picture. Clear effort and purpose is fueled into these projects, and that's why we can see the people working on it shine through. That's the briefest, quickest rundown of a film theory that I've ever done, but there you have it. Hideaki Anno isn't the simplest of people. Taking as long as he has off of the Evangelion Rebuild films, he indirectly addressed the auteur theory. When asked if he likes the anime he makes, he says he likes some, but hates others. When asked to elaborate, he says the parts where he sees himself. It's an interesting theory to look at, because so often, illustrations do somewhat resemble the illustrator, and you could say the same for film itself, for the auteur theory itself. And to have Evangelion, a story filled with angst and self-detestation, be envisioned by someone who hates to see himself in his own creations, is both ironic and tragically self-fulfilling, and that's to speak nothing of it even contributing to its effectiveness as a film. In interviews with Hideaki Anno, you can really feel the level to which he judges himself for some things. And to put it bluntly, he comes across as a bit of a tortured artist. To give a little backing to this point, another auteur in anime and one of my favourite directors, Mamoru Oshii, had an interview on Pia, which was faithfully translated by Comic Book Resources, that states, Oshii says that he and Anno have fundamentally different ideas of what a director should be. According to Oshii, Anno emphasizes the marketability and presentation of his films, making him more of a producer than a director, and leaving his films without a clear purpose. However, Oshii did acknowledge that Anno's increasing focus on business and his desire for upward trajectory suit him well. He also said that most of Anno's films are like I-novels, a Japanese literary genre focused on an author's personal confessions about their life. As such, Oshii feels that Anno remains true to himself in each work he creates, whether or not the audience appreciates that personal style. This editorial goes on to detail how Oshii realized he's an auteur in wholly different means, and all of my sources can be seen in the description and pinned comment below. But it, if anything else, is further proofing of my point, both from Anno himself and from other accomplished auteurs, that even if you don't think he's a tortured artist, he's the kind of creator that lays bare every piece of himself in his work. Cut to Evangelion and we see many personal monologues, Shinji's exhibiting of depressive behavior, attachment issues, detachment issues, and some really big existential questions throughout. I've talked about how much you can make Ava's ending resemble many different things, but right now, talking about auteur theory, there seems to be a big case for it resembling the creator itself. We'll come back to this point again, because mental instability is a big part of Ava and it unfortunately does tie into Anno again down the line. Unlike using psychoanalysis to look at a tangential topic, for the sole purpose of conveying it, let's treat this one topic like a rabbit hole and go deeper into analysis. Evangelion is set in a post-apocalyptic world after a cataclysmic event. These events are known as impacts and are directly related to mysterious, omnipotent entities and items. These things are unhuman, larger than man, beckon their own foreboding soundtracks, and almost drive the humans to their actions by simply existing. It's hard not to make comparisons to the Monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey, an entity so beyond our comprehension that it simply defies human thought. I think that it might really go as far as that, which you might be surprised to hear. Yeah, a 30-minute video where I actually don't even try to guess what's happening here. With enough reasoning, you can think up a whole world of possibilities as to what these mystical forces can conjure, but the very presence of it around the characters in this story simply drives them all to their own purposes, and they end up getting caught in the spider's web of that drive. The quasi-religious names given to them all, angels, Adam, Lilith, Longinus, they're all metaphors for the fanatical nature that religion can cause on humans. After all, the characters in the story literally gave them that name. Lilith doesn't exactly speak. The characters are so obsessed with it and so obsessed with learning something that they can't comprehend that they give them these names, without taking a step back and seeing their own obsessive madness. Anno once said that this is a story in which all of the characters are sick people. I think what he's getting at with this is that the main forces in this story are practically catalysts for the mental degradation of the obsessive heads at NERV, after which everyone else is strung along, helpless as they may be. The real purpose or explanation, or heck, anything apart from surface layer existence for these forces is irrelevant. It works both on the level of having it be all about the characters and also leaves the mystery there by having no exact explanation. It's interesting that, as a first-time viewer, a lot of people, myself included, saw Shinji's strained efforts as an aggravating plot point. It's funny that we were so bought into the story that it was easier to see Shinji as the problem and not this fanatical madness at NERV. Shinji's just a boy who wants the closeness to his father that he never had. Everyone would rather go home than have to pilot an Ava to kill that thing. Things really fall apart with the death of Rei and Kaworu, largely due to byproducts of Shinji's inaction, who would just close up and not want to make decisions anymore. Shinji's like the single pawn that's left on a losing chess match, and him losing it at the end is largely his realization of that, straight after Asuka bites the dust. I think a large part of the meaning of Evangelion is simply Shinji's feelings, and the fact that an impact starts straight after his breakdown is reason enough to see that as the true meaning. To focus on the Lance and Lilith and not on what's going on with the characters and the reasons behind it is to look at the whole and miss the donut. In Shinichiro Inoue's interview with Anno, straight after the first anime's ending, Anno said, "The reason why the main character is 14 years old is that he's no longer a child, but not yet an adult. He lives alone, but is attached to others. In past centuries, he would soon celebrate his coming of age. Back then, life expectancy was 50 years, so people had to grow up in 14 years. Today, we live more than 70 years, and although the age of maturity in Japan is 20 years, most people still depend on their parents at that age. One could wonder if it's the parents making them dependent, or about parents, what age should they decide to be of maturity? Considering age 14 as that in which an independence of mind starts manifesting, I found it proper to include this in my work. One of these components furthers this analysis. Ava 01, the unit that was controlled by Shinji's mother, Yui. Her soul is now one and the same with Ava 01, so when Shinji sat there in the unit, he's metaphorically a fetus, an underdeveloped, immature boy. When the impact happens, it's birth-like in that we see all of these unknown lights and flashes of colour. We hear voices, and then all of a sudden, a whole new world emerges, with Shinji outside his mother. It's metaphorical for Shinji's maturity, his growth, and independence from the need for his parents that he had from the beginning. His strangling of Asuka is simply him taking action, and it's why Asuka smiles and caresses him, because this whole time she wanted a mature man. Her crush on Kaji is proof of this. Conversely, she also hated Shinji for his immaturity this whole time. The fact that Shinji is taking an action is to be mature, and so she caresses him because she now sees him as a man. Whilst End of Evangelion and episode 25+26 in the original show differ tremendously, they kind of do still convey that narrative. People commonly share the belief that this ending is a result of running out of budget, but after extensive research, I simply can't find any proof of that being the case at all. In fact, quite the opposite. Without cells, we made do by using the sketches of the storyboard in their place. It wasn't a matter of having time to make them or not. In any event, we ended up doing without animation on cell. Cells are symbolic representations. After having drawn Asuka with a marker, as soon as Yuko Miyamura gave it her voice, it was more Asuka than ever. I even came to detest myself for having wasted time on cells at all. Based on what I've read, this was still the ending that Anno wanted, but when the fan outrage of the original ending resulted in death threats and the opportunity to make a film appeared, Anno decided to make a more digestible readaptation. For the longest time, I also thought that the original ending was the result of a budget problem. It's easy to see why. There's long holding shots of nothing but talking everywhere, there's reused assets, what looks like deleted or alternate scenes, and even the same sequenced cells, but flipped to the acrylic side. It wasn't until we got a clearer context for the Human Instrumentality project that we could re-understand what we just saw. Additionally, and it's been brought up before by many others, but it's important to note that the recap film which came out right before End of Evangelion, Death and Rebirth, wasn't just a rescan of the original series. Because it was animated on cell, they could have largely just rephotographed the series with a wide-angle lens film camera, at most repainting the backgrounds to extend to a more standardized cinematic aspect ratio, but instead of this, they decided to repaint the cells into larger cells. For whatever reason, the very fact that they did this proves that there wasn't a budget problem. To essentially reanimate on this scale for a simple recap film, it's gonna be expensive, unnecessarily expensive. But yeah, taking things straight out of Anno's mouth, we can completely dispel there ever being a budget problem at any point in Evangelion, old or new. Hideaki Anno is a bit of a cynic, especially towards himself. Anno can be proud of his work in one interview and then completely dislike it in another. During the production of this film saga, the remakes of Evangelion, the rebuilds as they're commonly known, Anno was enthusiastic and eager to reboot the series, but by the third film, things had changed considerably. Anno was completely burned out, and it's unclear to what degree, but it seems production was abandoned altogether on anything past the very, very early conceptualization of the last Evangelion film. The burnout for the film must have happened partially into production of the third film, because if you listen to the amazing soundtrack by Shiro Sagisu, you can hear a song that sounds an awful lot like the kind of music he'd be producing on his next venture. See if you can guess what it is. If you guessed Berserk, you're a winner. It seems even Sagisu knew that 3.0 plus 1.0 wasn't going to be his next venture. Band of brothers, leader of the raiders, born in anger. Yeah, sounds like Shinji. Is it a coincidence that it seems like it was made for Berserk right before he went on to work for Berserk? Probably not. To get back to Anno though, years and years would pass, with Anno giving dejected and unenthusiastic answers to those wondering what was happening to the fourth film. Then, a really good Godzilla film came out. Shin Godzilla is a subversive remake of the original Godzilla in which a metaphorical nuclear-related hazard wreaks havoc upon Japanese mainland. It was a thriller of escapism through the horrors that the audience had quite clearly lived through, a cautionary tale of the monstrous effects that humanity's dabbling with nuclear power can cause. Shin Godzilla almost comes in assuming you have that knowledge and starts surrounding you with humans. Tons and tons of humans, emotionlessly talking protocol, politics, tactics, and war. The attention is brought to Shin Godzilla when it's growing, a creature so vast and underdeveloped that it isn't aware of what it's doing. We're then brought back to the attention of the humans, trying to kill it, and all of these scenes of talking and PR, then to the attention of Shin Godzilla being barraged and hurt, reacting with unpredictable atomic breath, at everything around it. The music swelling intense, almost connoting the terrified and cornered feeling of the creature. A scene that affirms its sentience. We empathize with Godzilla in this scene. And it really is hard not to when all we're given from the opposite side is all this emotionless talk. That empathy is something we struggle to see in the humans who carry on and not only converge their efforts to annihilate it, but never ponder upon that sentience. When they meet their wish and Shin Godzilla dies, we see tons of humanoid creatures on its tail, reaching desperately to survive. It's a horrible shot, it's clearly meant to be. Maybe, just as viewing the destruction of Nagasaki and Hiroshima told the world all we needed to know about how horrible these tools of war can be, the clear reliance on and perpetuation of these devices in the modern day is a result of us not having learnt our lesson, but having changed as a society for the worst, with nuclear power ingrained permanently into the way our leaders govern. So, in a way, we're not just the monsters in this version of Godzilla. That's what you'd think the film is about, just based on the atomic breath scene. No, we're not just the monsters. We are them, the humanoids on the tail, the final evolution. It's like a mirror showing us just how close we are and how inhuman it is to continue having nuclear power so embedded in our core that we are the ultimate evolution. In the world of fantastical sci-fi, Godzilla isn't just an embodiment of hopes and dreams, but a caricature of reality. Almost a kind of satirical reflection of the world. Painting present-day Japan in that light is something of a crazy experiment. Might sound pretty depressing, but Anno's work seems to have this tendency of reflection and cynicism. Either way, this movie was amazing. It shows that through it all, Anno hadn't lost it. Everything that someone would love Evangelion for, would love this movie for too. So if you haven't seen it, then give it a watch. Even if I have just spoiled the whole f***ing thing for you. Shiro Sagasu even paired back up with Anno for this film, even going as far as to have an Eva soundtrack in the movie. It takes itself back to a simpler backdrop, a story heavily ingrained in Japanese culture, and even Anno makes things that little bit more complex, with Godzilla being more humanized than ever before. But in all seriousness, this film was amazing both to watch and to create from the audience perspective and from his. Elaborating more on what happened with Eva and the curative nature of Shin Godzilla, Anno had this to say. December 2012, just after Eva Q opened, I was broken. I guess you could say I was depressed. That's what I get for spending the last 6 years of my life tearing my soul to pieces to create Eva once again. Then came 2013. It was a year in which endless waves of mental negativity returned to me. I couldn't bring myself to get anywhere near the studio I represented and the studio that was burdened with my project. My relationship with other people and society became distorted, and the seemingly perpetual fatigue didn't help either. I was gradually consumed by my growing mental instability. I caused all sorts of issues for many people during this period, but with the help of my wife and my friends, I managed to take a break from things. Hayao Miyazaki and his offer of a voice role in his film gave me an opportunity to cling to anime production, and my friends making new installments of the anime series that made me become an anime fan. In the start of 2014, I finally returned to the studio, and I slowly got back into producing anime, after spending over a year to rehabilitate my mind. In October of that year, during planning for a special collection of my work to be shown at the Tokyo International Film Festival, I was truly happy to have the opportunity to look back on the work I'd produced all the way back to when I was in high school. I received an offer from Toho saying, "We'd like you to direct a new Godzilla film." I was still pretty mentally unstable, so I declined on the spot. There's no way I could do that. I still have to finish Eva, I can't. But Toho's sincerity and the enthusiasm of my good friend Dr. Shinji Higuchi swayed me, and by March, I'd accepted the position of director. I decided to take the job because I knew that if I didn't take on another new piece, something that wasn't Eva, I wouldn't be able to move forward. And that's exactly what he went and did. With Studio Khara opening its doors once more, hope was restored. Almost in celebration, Anno's wife produced this incredible jazz album. It's conducted by Sagasu and sung by the vocal talent from the series itself. It takes some of the best themes of the whole series and just takes into a really mad place. Complemented upon with a tagline from Anno himself. The tagline, you ask? Goodbye, all of Evangelion. Another interpretation for End of Evangelion is that Shinji, the lone voice to rise above others in the Human Instrumentality Project, where everyone becomes primordial soup, was responsible for the world becoming the way that it did. In this interpretation, some believe that the rebuilds are quite literally Shinji, as that lone voice, willing the rebuilds into existence and starting all over again to reach a new outcome. Let's go into why this theory surprisingly works so well. I think the biggest general difference from the main series to the rebuilds is to go from a Shinji that rejects everything and becomes dissonant to a Shinji that actually grows and, almost uncharacteristically, tries, which is ironically the exact same path that Anno himself took when producing these rebuilds, when he was in a bad place and couldn't find the will to do it anymore before growing to find that in himself again. It's almost like going ahead with Shinji's more determined personality. Anno had to find that note in himself before being able to make such a character come from him in an honest, believable way. The Rebuild saga begins with 1.0 by straight up readapting the first 8 or so episodes in what even Anno called a faithful adaptation of the original series. Next, in 2.0, the film strayed from the original series in what I find to be Evangelion's peak moments, with a newly realized third impact altogether. It's almost this understated love story between Rei and Shinji that just complements the leftover feelings of the original story that's just perfect. From there, 3.0 and 3.0 plus 1.0 take things in vastly different directions. From the get-go in 3.0, Shinji is active, self-aware, and wants the best for Rei, himself, and the people around him after a third impact. It's a fascinating continuation of not only the literal Shinji from the last film, but the Shinji that we saw back in 1997, with even a little allusion towards this. This is a Shinji that has been in stasis for the last 15 years, the exact time difference between End of Evangelion and 3.0's release. It's more of a spiritual continuation as far as that similarity goes, but we went from a Shinji that was needed and chose to do nothing, to a Shinji that was brought back and unwanted, whilst he wanted nothing more than to make himself useful. That tragic self-fulfillment of realizing the flip side is still part of the same dysfunctional coin makes 3.0 seem ever more like a converse End of Evangelion. It only adds credence that Shinji would want to try more and become the savior if that past reality really ingrained into his spirit. After the creation of this reality, this is back to that theory now, he knows more than ever that he is the human instrument, but one that nobody wants to use or even wants in general. I suppose you could say the deep-seated neglect towards Shinji may come from, in this theory, a subconscious knowledge of what his past involvement can lead to. The shots where he stares away from the perspective is almost in direct contrast to the in-his-face storyboarding of End of Eva. It was always a series about people stuck in a web, but now with Shinji, a chosen child, aware, active, and outward, is the polar opposite to the original, this being an almost inverse reality of its own fiction. I think a large part of why we never saw the third impact the second time round is because, well, we have already seen it. Despite looking like a supernatural thing, we can see in 3.0 that there's bullet holes and pure devastation that led us straight to a continuation that resembles everything we've already seen. It also makes sense that in a previous world where Shinji, the instrument, remade the world, he gave himself a retry with this current continuity, because in this third impact, he has lost a lot less, and so the cataclysmic result of the world is far lessened than the original. And even here, we see the comfort that Shinji longs for manifesting itself, this time in the form of a Walkman. The fact that he grows to detest it in the absence of the real Rei is evidence of him moving past these comforts, and it acts as a catalyst for Shinji to grow beyond it and restore the real relationships in his life. Where Shinji didn't engage to anyone no matter the prompting, here he's outward to the point of emotionally breaking down and getting nothing back from anyone. It's a boy who cried wolf scenario inverted 2 times over just to fully understand that disparity. The inversed reality doesn't stop here though. Shinji acting physically first against Asuka is reflected through a punch to his face from Asuka in 3.0. Shinji is still the same Shinji because even living around prison-like morbid banality, he can find comfort if he only connects to another. This is where he finds comfort with Rei and Kaworu. It's interesting that this isn't really Rey. She isn't his Rey, but because it fits his idea of her, it becomes comfortable. It's simple lack-on theory. That which you lack, you desire. People sometimes find ways to project that lack onto something or someone entirely different to fill that void. There's another film theory given to you in about 5 seconds. I feel like it might be a little auteur nod from Anno towards Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece Vertigo, a movie that dived into this exact theory. She is a literal puppet, an empty canvas that Shinji paints his picture of Rey onto. The fact that Rey asks what the word like means is just the icing on the delusional cake. The fantasy is made reality when Shinji and his crush from a past life, Kaworu, perform an unrehearsed masterpiece together. Kaworu, being alive at this point, allows Shinji to realize his folly with Rey and furthers him on that path of growth.
Shunning change, you prefer the empty, indifferent world of the abyss.
She's not even the real Rey.
I'm not Rey.
The two performing masterpieces together usher in a surreal montage. Some viewers really hate it when I talk about Freud, but two boys with sexual tension, two horses, the horses going across the sheet. The horse's appearance connotes that of two. This background used to make me think of MC Escher, but now it almost feels like a fractured mental state, with it really just portraying a metaphor for the mental state of Shinji. You could almost doubt the reality of what's being shown and what's in his head, as most of these scenes play out with Shinji and a singular other person at a time. When he's rejected, he leaves, and when he leaves, he goes to nothing but unchallenging people. Even his father walks off screen when Shinji challenges the reality of the situation. Rey has no memory, so cannot be challenged, and Kaworu just wants him to be happy, almost in a romantic way, but this itself is done in such a way as to not let Shinji vent or rationalize. He's a cushion for that reality. The dreamlike reality is even held up in the few scenes without Shinji, with Gendo and Fuyutsuki holding their meetings in a half-destroyed, about to crush them to the size of a penny building. There aren't fourth wall breaks in this film so much as there are endless phrases with double meanings to play around with this idea of reality. At the 1 hour mark, you could play the conversation between Shinji and Kaworu after Kaworu's previous death, and it would make even more sense than it does in the film alone, in a room that only now becomes a set piece reminiscent of the end of Evangelion. And this, by the way, is Shinji's room. The purpose, in my eyes, being that Shinji's room is all in his head, this being the moment where the curtains are pulled back. Kaworu is never acknowledged by anyone other than Shinji. In fact, none of the characters that aren't Shinji even acknowledge each other, apart from Gendo and Fuyutsuki. As a remake series that surpasses the timeline of the original, it's written really well. The characters are true to themselves from the original series, but just pushed much further than where they left off, both in the last film and where their personas were left off in the prior iteration. Misato is this blunt commander who's finally carved out a slice of higher power that she long sought for. Gendo was driven into borderline reclusiveness due to his ambitions, all but practically closing himself and his work away from anyone else. Just like how the meaning that we construed from the original series was Shinji and growth or maturity, the rebuilds seem to be going for a shared maturity, a growth in terms of a group of people, and it's done in terms of the characters but also done by Anno as a means of saying goodbye to Evangelion, something which has been front and center to the Rebuild franchise. It's a way of reaching a climax to everything set up before, whilst delivering on notes of finality that End of Eva, being the masterpiece that it was, still couldn't deliver upon due to the kind of ending it was going for. To finish off, it turns out I just uploaded this on the literal Western release date for the final movie, subbed and dubbed on Amazon Prime in 240 countries, so I hope you've enjoyed the refresher. My thoughts on the overall series won't be changed by the last film, but definitely expect a decently big video solely on the last film at some point in the future. Thanks so much to my patrons for making this video possible with their continual support. This is the first big video that they got early access to for $1 a month. But for those who also support further than that, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Patrons will be able to read the script before anyone else, so consider joining if you haven't already. Comment your thoughts on Eva and my points down below, leave a like, and make sure you're subscribed for more. Have a wonderful night.